Alright guys, today I'm going to give you a tutorial on how to create a flight tracker or follow flight, whatever you may call it. Here's a quick example of what I'm talking about. Notice we got a blue line tracking the disc golf disc thrown here. Now this can be done with a frisbee or a football, a golf ball, uh, whatever sport, but ideally you need to be able to see the object's entire flight. So probably a little bit more difficult with a golf ball, but here we go. So just before I start, I do want to give a shout out to Jeff Derizzo. I found his instructions on YouTube here. He did a video for Central Coast Disc Golf, and in his comment on his video, he actually explains in After Effects how to do what he's calling the follow flight, as you can see here in his video, similar to what I just showed you. So huge shout out to Jeff. I basically followed his instructions in his comments here, and that's how I got to where I got. So I will show you how I do this in After Effects, and this is basically following Jeff's instructions. So I got a video here of my wife throwing a crush here, hole 18 at Veterans Park in Arlington, Texas. We're going to try to get a nice follow flight behind this disc here. So to start out, after you load your video into After Effects, the most important thing that you need to do is what's called the track camera. Over here on the right side, you see this track camera option. So if there's any zooming or panning at all in your video, you have to use this track camera option. This is what basically creates the 3D effect and allows the flight path of the disc to not move as your camera moves, but more stay in place, in a 3D space. So what we'll do here is we'll hit this track camera option. This piece takes a little bit, so I'm going to fast forward it some. But one thing you need to note is for the shot type, you need to use the variable zoom. And then under advanced here, you need to hit the detailed analysis option. This will take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, just depending on how complex the video is. So I'm going to let this run and I'll get back with you guys. All right, so the 3D camera tracker process has completed. And once it's complete, you'll see all these little markers on your video, different little points of reference for the 3D tracker. Basically what it's done is it's located objects in the video that it sort of can track throughout the video. So it's going to allow us to use them as a frame of reference for when we actually draw the flight path. So what I typically do, and again this is following Jeff's advice, is I pick a point close to what we're going to call the T-pad. Now in this specific video the T-pad's cropped out, but I've found it best if we just pick an object near the T-pad, or the nearest to where you're actually throwing from. So you want to avoid, sometimes you'll get this target or you'll get these lines that are connecting multiple points here. What you want is just one point by itself. So I found the point right here that I want to use, and I'm going to right click on this point and I'm going to hit create null and camera. So now that I've created this null in camera, here's really the important piece, and this is what kind of makes or breaks your actual track line from moving around in your video. So here where we've got track null, under transform, I've got the position object here. I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to copy this. So on my Mac, I'm holding the command button and hitting C. On a Windows computer, you'd hold Control and hit C. But I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to say layer, new layer, shape layer. And then on this shape layer, this again, this is a very important piece. If you miss this part, it's going to mess your video up. You need to right click on the shape layer and make it a 3D layer. Now the other thing you notice here, this little cube popped up when I said that. So here's the other way you can make it a 3D layer. You just hit your cube right there. Now that you've got the cube selected, under here on transform and position, we're going to paste that value we just copied earlier. So now I'm going to hit Command V, or again on a PC it'd be Control V. So you notice now that layer followed the same place we put the null camera for the track. As soon as we pasted this shape layer, it moved this 3D object down to there. So alright, so now that we've got this, we can actually start drawing this shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the pen tool up here, and then I'm going to find the place in the video where Shelby releases the disc. So right about, we'll say here, this is where I want to start this flight path. So another important thing here is, so what I've got is I've got this shape layer and I hit this pen tool and we're about to start drawing a shape, and really it's just going to be a line. You need to make sure there's nothing fill, fill is empty here, and that you have stroke selected. And you can adjust the stroke width later in this video, and I'll show you how to do that. But this right here is also extremely important. This roto Bezier, I'm not even sure how to pronounce this thing, Bezier. But basically, if this is not checked, you're going to get real jagged lines. With roto Bezier selected, it's actually going to allow, After Effects is going to create smooth arches out of everything you do. So you'll kind of see that as we go. We're not going to get any jagged lines because this is selected. So anyway, so what we'll do here is, now that the disk has been released, I'm going to start drawing my path. So I'm going to do this, just try to aim for the center of the disk, right under it here, and I'm going to put that as my first point. Then we're going to drag the timeline forward a little bit. Now you pretty much, you can play around with how often you add a point, but generally speaking, if the object is flying in a pretty true straight path, you don't have to have a ton of points in between each new point. But as we know in disc off, oftentimes a disc will turn and then fade. So when it's actually doing more turning or fading, that's when you want to start having more points. That way your angled flight on the pen tool stays a little bit more in line with the actual flight of the disc. So again, we're throwing it pretty straight here still. So I'm going to go out a little bit farther than I usually do, just for the sake of this video, and find another point out here. The more accurate and close you want this to the disc, the more points you'll make. But again, for the sake of this video, I'm actually going to not do quite as many points at the beginning here. But as we get going a little bit further, you see this disc is starting to kind of flatten out a little bit. It's about to start its turn process. So I'm going to add a few more points than I was doing before. And I'll speed this up a little bit for you guys so you don't have to follow this all the way through. Alright, so we've got the complete path drawn here. Now, as you noticed, as you were moving advancing the frames of the video, you notice the actual flight tracker would sort of follow what we're calling the imaginary camera. It wasn't just sitting in the middle of the screen. If your flight tracker is just sitting in the middle of your screen while you're advancing here, and it's not sort of moving around with the video itself, most likely that means you messed something up either with the track camera option or possibly pinpointing the position of this shape layer. So go back and watch the beginning of the video if that happens to you. So as you can see here, the entire flight path is already drawn out before the disk's even thrown. So we don't want that. So what we're going to do, I'm actually going to take the shape layer here. I'm going to collapse this thing. So I'm going to take this shape layer and I'm going to say don't even start showing me this until we get to about right here. And then the next step that I'm going to do is, and again, this is kind of important. This is what gets us, this next step is what gets us the actual trailing effect. Here in the shape layer, under this add button, we're going to click add. We're going to click trim paths. So this is what gives us the actual line trailing behind the disk. So I'm going to say give me 0%. Leave the start at 0 during this piece. We're only going to mess with the end value. So the end value I'm going to change to 0. And as you'll see, our entire blue path will disappear here. So I'm going to move forward in this a couple frames here. I'm going to say, okay, now give me 2%. Nope. Now, as you can see, 2% didn't quite get me there. So you can adjust this slider if you want, or you can just try typing in the numbers manually. It's just whatever works best for you. So again, the more accurate you want to be, the more time this part takes. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to run through it a little quicker than I usually do. But so we'll go about right here or so. And then every time I advance, actually, sorry, this is a good example. I did not, although I changed the percentage here, I didn't actually start my stopwatch here. So I'm going to go back to where I wanted to be. So right here I want to be at 0. And to start this at 0, you need to hit this little stopwatch. So once I click that, now you'll start to see these little marks on your timeline. That's every time that you change your percentage here, you're going to add another mark. So for right here, I want my line to be at, looks good, at about 11%. So when I did that, you see it added another little point here. So I'm going to advance a little bit more. And then again, I'm going to, just for the sake of this video, I'm going to cruise through this a little quicker than I usually do. But so that looks good, 34%. So as I'm going back through this, I'm noticing that I was a little bit off on a couple of my points. So I'm just sort of adjusting those a little bit as I go here. The way I did that was I went back and actually selected the shape here and then went to the pointer and just got a little bit closer to the actual flight of the disk. So another thing that you probably notice, and this is one thing that was bothering me a little bit, when at the beginning of the flight we've got a real narrow line here, and at the end of the flight that line becomes pretty thick, and it's because we're zooming in on the line as well as the shot. So what I've found is, what I like to do is I like to actually start with the path being a little bit bigger. So over here under stroke, right now the stroke width is 5. I like to start out with something like, let's see what 20 looks like. All right, 20 is too much, so let's try 10. All right, I like the width of this line a lot better. So, but by starting out at this thick of a line, once we get here, you'll see that this line is going to be massive. So similar to what we did with the timeline on getting the path to follow the disk, we're going to do the same thing but with the width of that line. So what I'm going to do here is on this stroke width, I'm going to move my time back to the beginning of the path here, and I'm going to, same thing, I'm going to hit this stopwatch. So that's going to say at this point I want the width to be 10. And then I'm going to go to the very end of this flight, And I'm going to say at, let's say by the time we get to the end of the flight, and that's about the time that I put my 100% on this line, by the time we get here, I want this to be more like, let's just say 3. So you see how the width of this line sort of matches what we started out with. Then we'll show you one more time here. See, here's about the width of the line now, and then here it is at the end of the video. Fairly similar. At the end of the video, it actually is a little bit thinner. And I like that too because it sort of gives you the effect that this line is thicker at the front, so it's sort of closer to you, and then it's thinner at the end, so farther from you. But you can play with that to see the different sizes and all that kind of stuff that you like. One other cool little trick I like to do at the end, this is just personal preference, is once the flight of the disc is pretty much complete, like let's say it is, let's say like after it hits the ground for the first time, I like to do a cool little effect where we actually close, or I have the path actually trail off. So to do that, I'm going to go back over here to my trim paths, and right now we've got this start at 0%. So I'm going to put a time path there. So it's basically, it's saying I want the very beginning of this line to be at my 0 point, which is essentially where Shelby released the disk from. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say at the end of this line, I want the end of my line to be 100%, which matches the end of the path. So you'll kind of see, let's see if I can get it to play through once and render it. Kind of see what I'm talking about here. See how the line sort of trails away at the end. So now you'll see it a little bit faster. Let's bring that back one more time. So that was actually a little bit faster than I wanted it to trail off, so I'm going to start it more like here. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, still a little bit faster. But anyways, I won't spend too much time on that. I'll let you guys play around with that, and you can adjust that to your heart's desire. I like that. Play around with it, see what you think. So that's basically it. One last thing that I like to do is just play with the glow of the line. So let's see if I can, yeah, I'm going to click off here. So we've got this sort of solid looking line here. A cool thing you can do is up in the, here, let's see, I'm going to choose the shape layer, and then up in the effect tab or the effect menu, under stylize and then glow, and then I like to set, I pretty much leave all these the same, but I just set color A to match whatever color I'm using for the stroke here. So let's just see if we can grab that. So you can adjust this glow threshold a little bit just to play with different options here, but basically it just changes the lineup just a little bit to get a little bit more of a stylized feel to it instead of just the solid line that it starts out with. So it's got to run through one time to cache itself, and you can sort of see, like I said, this every now and then the disk gets a little bit farther than the line, or the line ahead of the disk. That's just because I sort of rushed through this one a little bit, but take your time on it. The more you do it, the more accurate you'll get with it, and the quicker you'll get at it. So let me know in the comments below what you think, if you have any questions. Again, shout out to Jeff, and I'll link his YouTube account in the comments below. But thanks guys for sticking around, and looking forward to see some of y'all's fall flights.